Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Raggio. I'm a senior fellow at Foundation for Defense of Democracies and editor of FDD's Long War Journal. This is Generation Jihad, the podcast that covers all things in what used to be known as the global war on terror, but we now call the Long War. My co-host today is Joe Truzman. Joe is an editor and a senior research analyst at FDD's Long War Journal, where he focuses on Palestinian terror groups, Hezbollah, and all things happening in the region. Joe, welcome back. It's been a while since we talked. Great to catch up.
Yeah, definitely, Bill. Happy to be here. We missed you on Friday. If the listeners didn't tune in, I hosted the show Generation Jihad on Friday with our dear colleague Benham, and it was interesting. So, but yeah, happy to be here.
Indeed, and thanks for picking up the slack. I was trying to get a little bit of 4th of July time. Maybe I got a little too much, but I think it was needed. A lot happening I guess it was over a week since we've spoken.
Right.
I guess that we'll just start with the number one issue, the talk of a ceasefire. Things seem to be progressing. There's reports that Hamas dropped the demand that Israel halt all military operations indefinitely or permanently. Give us some details on what's the discussions about the ceasefire, and what do you think that there is prospects for this actually happening?
Yeah, so you're right. This ceasefire deal we've been hearing over the last few days has picked up some steam, which is good. I think the biggest thing that's happened here is that it's allowed, I guess you could say, that has allowed the ceasefire, these negotiations, ceasefire for the ceasefire deal to move ahead. Is that, and this is what's being reported, is that Hamas dropped one of its big demands that Israel were to completely halt the war, all right, and withdraw from Gaza if they wanted to go or move on with a ceasefire, right, or and get the hostages, right? That was the thing. Israel had to stop the war first. That was the demand. But now it's been reported, at least, that Hamas dropped this demand. All right, so negotiations have been able to move forward. Now, I've said it before. I'm a bit of a pessimist when it comes to this. When it comes to what I hear reported in the news, and especially about this war. But the way I see it is this. So I think it's absolutely true that Hamas did, drop this demand. But I suspect that somewhere down the line, they're going to ask for something big, okay? Something like, hey, listen, they're going to say, well, look, we dropped this demand, right? This demand that we've been really pushing for since the beginning. And now the Israelis, they have to reciprocate, right? So what are the Israelis going to do, right? So either way, the Israelis are going to, I think, I won't say they're going to pay for this, but I think in the end, Israel's going to have to give up something big, and I'll talk about that here in a moment. So now we're seeing a lot of activity as far as American officials, Israeli officials, and Hamas, of course, and us, the mediators that are involved, whether it's Egyptians or the Qataris. They're all essentially getting together. I think there's a meeting this week in Egypt involving some of these officials, so they can negotiate, right? So the terms of a ceasefire. So, which is, it depends how you look at this war. It could be a good thing. It could be a bad thing, right? I mean, if you're the type that wants Hamas, eliminated or destroyed, these ceasefire negotiations might not be something you want to see happen, right? Until Hamas is destroyed. On the other hand, you have the folks that, they want the hostages back. Of course, they're in Hamas captivity. So, and this ceasefire can bring it about. And of course, something that's very important here is that Hezbollah has said all along that if there's a ceasefire in Gaza, they will cease firing at Israel in the north. So that's important. And I think the Islamic resistance in Iraq as well will stop firing at Israel, including the Houthis. So this is all interconnected. So nevertheless, I think what's happening now is, compared to news about the previous news about ceasefires that we've had over the months, over this last 9 months, I think this one is legit. I think something's going to come out of it. All right. Both sides are going to have to sacrifice something, right? Hamas obviously has dropped its demands. I think Israel, unfortunately, they're going to have to give up a lot as far as the Palestinian terrorists that are in Israeli prisons. We've talked about this before, Bill. And so we'll see. It's going to take time, but I think this is going to happen. But I don't know if Hamas is going to remain in power. Again, I'm a pessimist. I think they probably will. I hate saying it. I really do. I think if Hamas, Mohammed Deif, and other Hamas leaders are still around, especially those are like those are in Gaza. I just can't see Hamas being removed from the picture. Okay, until these leaders are basically eliminated, and they're not. So I just don't see Hamas going anywhere at the end of the day, which means that Israel would have failed in its goal of removing Hamas from power in the Gaza Strip. But that's just, again, I don't know if that's going to happen. But a part of me says that Hamas is going to stick around. So it's not good.
Yeah, I agree with you, Joe. If the Israelis take this deal, if they sacrifice, if they make too many concessions, I think that we're going to be, Israel's just going to be back where it was on October 6th of last year. But in my estimation, in a worse situation. It's learned that, or Israel's enemies have learned that Israel is not, the message they'll get is that Israel is not fully committed to its defense, that Hezbollah can strike at will against Israel and get away with it. And, I just think the sharks will be circling at this point if Israel concedes here. I don't see, I'm a pessimist on this as well. We've had this conversation a million times. I think the Israeli government botched this. They lost the narrative quickly, and they refused to go all in against Hamas from the outset. They delayed the operation. They delayed seizing the border with Egypt, which to me, and then they've operated in a way that has allowed Hamas. Sure, Hamas may have taken over 10,000 casualties, but they have quite a pool to recruit from.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, and you're right about the shark circling. I think Iran, its proxies and its clients in the region now have a working formula for Israel.
Yeah.
That's what it is. They've proven it.
And if it doesn't take much to get the international community to turn on Israel, the United States, the Biden administration, obviously not a full turn, but the messaging that has come out has just emboldened Hamas and Iran and its proxies. I don't see how this ends well for Israel unless they pursue Hamas to the very end. And I'm just not seeing that. I'm not seeing that happen. And I'm not talking about the guys on the ground, the soldiers on the ground and the lieutenants and the captains and the sergeants. They're fighting hard, but I think their leadership is failing them. The hostage situation is so controversial in Israel. And this is another thing that Hamas, that the Iran and its proxies have learned, is the power of these hostages. They're literally holding the state of Israel hostage by holding these hostages. Joe, do we even have an idea of how many hostages are still alive?
Alive. I think there's just estimates. I see a lot of estimates. I don't, I hate saying for sure, like how many.
No, it's very clear, Joe. We don't know. I mean, but what is the reporting said on this?
I think last time I saw it's about 120 around there, a little more perhaps. So I mean, that's still a lot of hostages.
So they're all that number is thought to be alive, or that's the number of hostages in custody?
Forgive me. I'll have to. I don't know off the top of my head. I remember that number, 120, though, but I just don't remember because there's been a report. See, the problem is that we're getting just different reporting. Oh, there are estimates that half of them are still alive, but you get different estimates from different sources. It's tough to say, but I do remember that 120 or about that number, but I just don't recall if that's the amount of hostages that remain or that's the amount of hostages that are alive. But it's still, I mean, nevertheless, it's still a lot of hostages, right? So, but yeah, the only way to really get them and ensure that they're going to come back alive, right? At least the ones that Israel estimates that are alive is through a ceasefire deal, and that's why we're seeing all these protests in Israel from the families of hostages and others, of course, that pressuring the government to negotiate a ceasefire. And yeah, but then again, there's elements of the Israeli government that have threatened to dissolve the government essentially. If quit the government, dissolve it. If if the Prime Minister Netanyahu agrees to a ceasefire with Hamas, right? So that's another problem. So yeah, it's tough all around.
Yeah, the Israelis, this government has squandered its, and it's because time was never on its side. The internal unity, the one thing I've heard estimates, like, I remember this was a couple of months ago, but someone's saying we think there's only 30 to 40 hostages alive. So that might, I mean, if the Israelis are essentially, and by the way, we don't even know, because Hamas isn't letting people to come and they're not telling them. It's to their advantage to keep everyone guessing. How is Israel even supposed to negotiate when it doesn't even know how many people are still alive? How many hostages are still alive? This is just an absolute mess. And this is terrible for the families and for the hostages themselves, but Israel needs to think of its overarching national security interests about all 10 million or whatever the number is of Israeli citizens, and not, 100 or 50 or 30, whatever that number is. It's unfortunate, but here we are, because they can be in this same situation 2 years from now or 4 years from now, where we don't even know what that's going to look like 2 or 4 years from now.
Yeah. No, this will definitely be repeated as far as hostage taking. I'm not saying groups are going to try to take 200 hostages, 250 hostages again, but absolutely. I mean, it's worked. It's worked. I mean, they've been taking hostages for decades now. This isn't anything new. This is just the first time they've taken hostages in mass, right? So that's the thing, and it keeps working because Israel accepts it and then does a deal with these terrorist groups, right, to return these hostages, and so the cycle just repeats, just keeps on repeating, and it'll repeat again. Unfortunately, I think so. One little thing here I'll say is that now that we're seeing the ceasefire, these negotiations come together over the coming weeks, I strongly suspect we're going to see a lot of PR, right? So a lot from both sides, and of course propaganda. We're going to see Hamas really push out statements trying to make out that they are on the winning side here, that everything that they're doing, these negotiations, they're doing it for the Palestinian people to stop the so-called, what they like to say is the Israeli aggression on the Gaza Strip. And then Israel, of course, they will try to make it appear that they're not ending the war, that Hamas will be defeated. So it's going to be interesting the next few weeks, next few months, see what happens here. Again, I do think compared to the news that we've heard over the last 9 months of ceasefire negotiations, I think this one is something is going to come out of it. I really do think. I think the reason behind this, the reason I think this is that statements from government officials that this Rafah operation that's been going on for more than a month now, that it's winding down, essentially, that Israelis are shifting to a different phase of the war. So that tells me that they're trying to wind, the way I see it is that they're winding this war down, okay? And a ceasefire would probably work for them, right? But a lot of things can happen between now and a lot of things can still happen during these negotiations. So we'll see. But I just, at the end of the day, I have a hard time believing that this current government is going to survive. Israeli government, I just don't think it will, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I don't see how it does. I'm actually surprised it lasted this long.
Right.
One of my concerns is there's just really hasn't been any real accountability for what happened on on October 7th. And between that and not having this administration not articulating a clear path forward, whatever that may be, between those two things, it's really just allowed the Israelis to squander any opportunities that it had. Will the next government do any better? I don't know, but can it do worse than this? Possible. Maybe that's what Israel needs to see, but I just don't think any of this bodes well for the state of Israel, for the Israeli people. The enemy has the initiative. They're going to get away with October 7th, and that noose of the Iranian proxies and partners is tightening around Israel, and the international community is, I would argue, is largely turned on Israel. And this isn't something that's sustainable. If Israel wants it, at least needs to eliminate one of these fronts that is up against, right? And if they have an extended ceasefire in Gaza, and but really, how are the Israelis going to reinitiate operations? Right. Because that's going to stick in the propaganda for Hamas and for its backers.
Right.
Okay. The North is tricky. I don't know that, unless Israel wants to fully commit the resource, which I don't think it has, to fully defeat Hezbollah. So if it leaves these fronts open, the West Bank, which we'll talk about, is just sort of that simmering cauldron. And then, now you have the Iraqi and Syrian militias, and you have the Houthis engaging. It's not getting any better for the Israelis. They need to close off one of these fronts in order for them to be able to focus its efforts elsewhere. But it doesn't look like that's going to happen, does it, Joe?
No, I think a new strategy is needed here. I think the Israelis have realized this, right? So, which is a good thing. So this October 7th was a wake up call for them, and everything that's happened afterwards, as far as the multi-front attacks that is endured over the last 9 months. So I think a new strategy is needed here. Now, what is that new strategy, right? Do we eliminate a proxy? Do we eliminate, does Israel eliminate try to eliminate, I don't know, Hamas or whatever? I mean, it couldn't in 9 months, but maybe it's time to go for Iran, right? Maybe it's time to let Iran know that can't do this anymore. And instead of Israel trying to fight all these proxies, right? So nevertheless, I don't know, but again, what I am confident of is that a new strategy is needed here.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And Joe, that's a great point about Iran, right? Like Israel is chipping away at everything Iran is throwing at it, but not really engaging, not taking on the spider, at the center of the web I think until it realizes that, until it, is willing to take that risk of making Iran pay for its actions at home, because really that's what Iran is doing to the Israelis. It's every day there is an attack against Israel. Israel needs to make the Iranians realize that it actually has something to lose, not Lebanese bodies from Hezbollah or, Palestinian bodies from Hamas, but actual Iranians may pay a price, members of the regime, Iranian infrastructure.
Right.
And, but there just doesn't seem to be an appetite for that. Well, let's turn to, you brought something up right before we got on the show. Fascinating. A little blast from the past for me. I had to remember this one. His name is Haitham al-Tabatabai. Almost 1 year ago, actually 13 months ago, you tweeted about this military official who was pictured with Hashem Saif al-Din, who is a top Hezbollah commander. But we didn't know who he was. You speculated, is this Tabatabai? But we never really got an answer. Tabatabai, he's a specially designated global terrorist, $5 million reward. He's the head of Hezbollah's special forces in Syria and Yemen. Note that Hezbollah is operating in Yemen, not just in Syria. So he's a top Hezbollah military official. He's one of these guys that Hezbollah sends out to provide training, all types of support, just like they did, like Musa Ali Dakduk in Iraq, who he helped the militias, the so-called special groups, which became the deadly militias like Hezbollah brigades, Asiba Haq, et cetera, that now threaten not just U.S. forces but Israel directly. So, Joe, what do we talk to us a little bit about Tabatabai? You put a picture up there. Do we think that's him? It's one thing. He's wearing a uniform and it's got the Velcro for a name tape, and there's no name tape on there. I'm like, damn it, he could have helped us out on this one, right?
Right. Oh yeah. I mean, they do it on purpose, of course, because it's totally a Hezbollah thing. But yeah, so about a year ago, like 13 months ago, so Hezbollah started. They did this big, like show of force type, like military training. I think it was in southern Lebanon. They made a big deal about this. Okay, they invited journalists, and it was, and this is obviously this was before the October 7th war. And so it was a big deal, right? That Hezbollah was doing this. And again, I'm pretty sure it was in southern Lebanon. But anyway, so there was a lot of video of all the military equipment that was in their possession. It was very interesting, of course, because Hezbollah, as a Hezbollah watcher, that's something that interests me. And there was this guy that we saw that I observed, and he looked like someone that was at I think it was the Department of Justice. We had a $5 million rewards bounty on his head. This Tabatabai, Haitham Ali Tabatabai, and they have a picture of him on their website, their Rewards for Justice website. It looks like it's a sketch. It's not like
sketch, right.
Sketches, so sometimes it can be off. But and then Israeli media at the time a year ago would say, "Oh, it could be that guy." And so we looked into it. Unfortunately, we never wrote about it. We should have. Now, in hindsight, I wish we would have. But we found out through an U.S. intelligence official, and I say we, I mean Bill and I at FTD's Long War Journal, that they weren't sure. Essentially, they couldn't ID him for sure if this guy in this picture was Tabatabai. All right. Anyway, now just a few days ago, the same guy shows up back up. All right. Over a year now, he shows back up at a Hezbollah commander's funeral, Abu Nima, who was killed actually again a few days ago in an Israeli airstrike. So this mystery guy shows up, Hezbollah guy, again resurfaces at Abu Nima's funeral. It's like, oh, okay, he's somebody, but we still don't know if it's him. I can't say for sure it's him. There's some resemblance to the sketch, but there's not enough there to say for sure. But I just wanted to bring it up because it's kind of, this type of stuff you don't see often, right? And so it may be, but I think he is a somebody. Okay, obviously he's Radwan. You can just tell by the patch on the picture. It's up on my Twitter feed for those listening, so you can find it. It's dated July 4th, so you can see it there. He has the Radwan patch, and so he's a someone. Okay, but I don't know. I can't ID him for sure. All right, so it may be Tabatabai, but it's still interesting nevertheless. But so yeah, I think it's a kind of something to bring up here and discuss, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We got to get to his face in that picture, particularly that first picture you get a front on.
Yes,
and then that sketch. I think they look similar, but what do I know? Be nice if hey, if anyone out there is listening, if you could tell us, drop us a line. We'd really appreciate the tip. Right. Radwan, Joe, what is the Radwan Force?
Yeah, so it's named after Imad Mugnieh. Okay, so I'm sorry, Imad Mugnieh, and who is essentially one of Hezbollah's top commanders, who was assassinated, taken out by the Israelis, I think with the help from the CIA. And anyway, so he was taken out in Syria. Can't remember what year. I think it was like around 2007, I believe. So if my memory serves me correctly. Anyway, so it's named after, Ahmad Mugnieh, who was just a real thorn in the Israelis and the Americans. He and this force is basically special forces. I mean, that's just the easiest way I can put it. They're highly trained. They've fought in Syria and in numerous places. I can't recall the number, exactly what the figure is of how many there are. But I have no doubt that they've participated in this current war with Israel. Unfortunately, we have not seen open source, or I have not observed open source evidence showing that they've been active in this war. However, well, I'm sure we'll see some of that information when this war is over with Israel. So these guys are legit. I think the Radwan Force is something that the Israelis definitely worry about. All right, and there's been a lot of these rumors that Radwan Force would take part in a invasion of northern Israel, of the Galilee. All right, something similar to what the Palestinians did, what Hamas did in southern Gaza. Nevertheless, they're definitely I would say again, special forces. All
Yeah,
right.
no, that's
And
Joe.
that's it. That's it.
That's perfect. And like Mugnia, he goes back and he was killed in 2008. I remember that. Boy, yeah, right time frame. Joe, it just goes to show, like, that's talking 14, I don't know, 16 years ago. It's incredible, like how far these group or how far these individuals go back, the history of it, right? Mugnia definitely, look, the guy, according to Ali Muhammad, who was an Al Qaeda operative, he testified in a court that Mugnia set up a meeting, or actually that Muhammad set up a meeting between Mugnia and Osama bin Laden in Sudan. Mugnia is behind the establishment of Muqtada al-Sadr's Mahdi army and played a hand, obviously, right? Musa Ali Daktuk was one of his deputies, also special forces. That's how he was described, who helped create them. These guys go back, and that's why, Radwan is definitely the elite of a Hezbollah, that it's named after Mugnia, that, just tells you quite a bit. It isn't just a unit in name. It's one that has real meaning.
Right. I think, if I remember correctly, it's Ahmad Mugnia's his nickname was Haj Radwan, I think. So that's where it came from. But anyway, yeah. So yeah, again, we don't know it's him. Again, some people say it's him, some people say they don't. Who knows? But Hezbollah, I'll say this. Hezbollah would not put him in front of a camera if they didn't want to send a message, okay, to the Israelis. So who is this guy? I don't know, but he's not there by coincidence. That's all I have to say.
No, he's definitely someone. So like I said, if you know, let us know. We'd be really interested in hearing about that. Joe, let's turn to the West Bank.
Oh, yeah.
It's been a bit since we talked. Any new developments? This is the one, I know we keep say it every time. We keep waiting, but to me, this is the front that can cause the Israelis one of the biggest headaches.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, over the last few weeks, of course, the West Bank's been super active. The Israelis have launched several counterterrorism operations in areas such as Jenin, another place called Tulkarm, and they've gone after commanders, the terrorist infrastructure in those cities. Now, the problem, what's happened is that, at least on two occasions, two of these counterterrorism operations resulted in losses for the Israelis. Okay, now the West Bank, especially the northern West Bank, has turned into a IED heaven. Okay, and that's a big problem for the Israelis. Two counterterrorism operations over the last week, I think, the last week and a half. Two large IEDs were planted underground, or they tend to plant them under roads beneath them, take them up, and then just on a road, and then and then they'll detonate them when Israeli military vehicles pass over. This happened on two occasions, and nearly destroyed these military vehicles, and killed and injured Israeli members of the Israeli military. And so the Israelis have had to go back into Jenin and in the Tulkarm in these areas to go after the people responsible for these blasts. Okay, and they've been successful. All right, and just in the last few days, they've eliminated some of these terrorists that took part in these blasts. So, but it's, again, just like Gaza. It's just a cycle of violence. It just, the Israelis will go after, let's say, somebody or some infrastructure. Okay, they take it out, right? But then a few days later, something happens. The terrorist groups retaliate. Someone's hurt, or someone's killed. An Israeli's hurt, or Israelis killed a civilian, and then Israelis are back at it again, right? Responding to it. So it's a back and forth thing, and a lot of it. And I've been foot stomping this bill for 3 years now. I can't believe it. More than 3 years now, that this is happening because of one major thing, one big, actually several reasons, but one of the reasons is, of course, Iran is fomenting the violence. Iran is supplying these organizations with funds and arms, right? They're smuggling weapons into the West Bank via Lebanon, via Jordan, via Syria. This is an ongoing thing, and I just and I think also something important to note is that, again, the Palestinian Authority, they're not doing much. They're just basically hanging out. We see some activity sometimes. All right. Or earlier this year, we saw some activity by the PA to stymie these groups, especially Islamic Jihad. But it's just one of those things. They'll maybe arrest somebody or a couple people. They'll be active for a week or two, and then they just disappear, right? So then the Israelis are back at it, trying to back into the West Bank, going after these groups. So again, yeah, everything I've seen so far is that it just leads me to believe is that a new strategy is needed for the Israelis, right? What that strategy is, it could be really anyone's guess. I mean, personally, I would like to see more cooperation between the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli security force, Israeli security services. However, there's a lot of distrust there, obviously on both sides. There's a lot of people that don't want that to happen because of several reasons. The Palestinians see the Israelis as occupiers, and the Israelis see the Palestinians as terrorists. And these are government officials have these type of views. Okay, that's the problem. So it makes it very difficult for both sides to cooperate with one another. But this is a big, big problem, right? The West Bank, this is only getting worse. These counterterrorism raids are only going so far. They're not resolving the issue. It's just getting worse. And these groups are expanding. These groups are becoming more organized. These groups are learning. When I say groups, I mean Islamic Jihad, Hamas, Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, and others. All right. And I'm very concerned about the advanced weapons being smuggled into the West Bank, specifically, actually, like let's say something that we wouldn't see, like claymores and RPGs, things like that. And I'm sure you could talk about stuff that you've seen in Iraq, Bill, the roadside bombs there. That's what I'm afraid of, right? That can really, really cause a lot of damage. And I'm just waiting. One day, something really big is going to happen, right? As far as a terrorist attack, right? Whether it be a suicide bombing, which there have been attempts to do that already in the last 6 months, in the last 7 months. Car bombs. We saw one car bomb, or it's actually two car bombs in the last few months. Thankfully, it didn't turn out to be bad, but still, obviously, there are attempts. So it's stuff like that. So this is something I've been tracking. I'm currently tracking very, very closely because, like you said, Bill, I think that's the next thing that's really it can really going to be cause a lot of problems for the Israelis. I think that's what the Israelis are going to do at the end of this war. Once they're done with Gaza, once they're done with the Lebanon thing, that they're going to have to pivot to the West Bank. All right. They have to. There's just no other thing they can do because it's just growing out of control because the PA isn't doing anything. They're just sitting, right? So that's where we're at. I wish I could say when this is going to end for the West Bank, but not anytime soon. That's for sure.
Yeah, not if Israel continues to treat the threats that it's facing now as it is. I think that it just emboldens Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas and Al-Aqsa and other terror groups operating there. The little fun fact, the reason why, well, first, before I get to it, Gaza is so frustrating is because it's a problem that the Israelis should be able to handle. They could contain it, right? As long as they close that Egyptian border, Israel controls the rest of the borders. 140 square miles versus 21,070 square miles for the West Bank. The population, not all that different, 2 million in Gaza versus around 3 million in the West Bank. But if the Israelis are having trouble pacifying Gaza, which it can contain, which it doesn't share borders, only one border with Egypt, and it's a relatively short border that can be contained, how are the Israelis going to manage if this goes into a full-blown war into the West Bank? It's, geographically large and diverse. And, that border with, as you mentioned, with Lebanon, with Jordan, they're relatively porous. And this is really what I worry about. I think the West Bank could make Gaza look like a picnic, in my estimation. I don't know where, then this is why the Israelis need to shut down the problem and defeat Hamas and show the groups in the West Bank that, they can dish some of this out in the West Bank if they want to go there. As far as the Palestinian Authority goes, I mean, to me, it just seems like they round up the usual suspects when they have to, or if they move against a group like Palestinian Islamic Jihad, it's because it's in their interest to do so, not because it's in Israel's security interest to do so. There's more likely some type of competing or issues or personalities, I would guess, or like I said, round up some suspects to get the Israelis off their back and then, go from there. But any thoughts, Joe?
Yeah, ugh, yeah, it's hard to say. I think the Palestinian Authority, just kind of like you're saying, it does it when it moves when it interests them. When it interests them. Okay, so obviously these groups are undermining the Palestinian Authority's influence in the West Bank, even though the Palestinian Authority's influence in the West Bank is crap already for various reasons. But they've been sitting on their hands for 3 years, essentially, not doing much about this because either they're afraid to look bad in front of the Palestinian population, or they don't want to be seen as, that they're doing Israel's work, right? And that's a mistake. I think the PA is doomed, to be quite honest with you, at least in its current form, right? And I think, earlier we talked about this, I guess, some months ago now, that there was, talk about putting the PA and somehow getting the PA involved in Gaza and being, with some type of administration. It's just laughable, really, because they can't even govern the West Bank. How are they going to govern, Gaza that has, these established terrorist organizations that are so much stronger than the ones that they deal with in the West Bank? So anyway, yeah, it's a crapshoot, to be honest with you, with the PA. So we'll see. But I'll definitely, I'll keep tracking it. One thing I would like to quickly say, I haven't seen any new terrorist organizations in the West Bank. Like we saw maybe like a couple of years ago. There's nothing new groups. There's no new groups sprouting up, or like actual, like, I've seen a little bit of Islamic State activity, but these are just random, like almost individual instances, right? So it's not a lot. So I guess that's the good news, I suppose. But again, these groups are expanding. Islamic Jihad, especially, they are the spearhead. I'll tell you right now, there's one group I would focus on in the West Bank more than anyone is Islamic Jihad, more than Hamas, believe it or not. So, because they're just so active. And in a few weeks, actually, we'll have something up at Long War Journal, something that's has a lot of detail on these groups and what groups are in the West Bank, specifically the branches of established organizations. So, for example, Islamic Jihad, they have branches, all right, throughout the West Bank. So there's a Jenin branch, there's a Tulkarm branch, a Tubas branch, a Jabaa branch, so on and so forth. Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, pretty much the same thing in these different cities. Hamas does as well. And in essence, there's a bunch of groups, right? Essentially, rather, there's a bunch of groups that are working or that are operating in the West Bank. So it's super interesting. We'll have that again. I'm hoping to have that in the next few weeks on Long War Journal. It's basically a visual, so I think it'll be pretty neat. So you can get it. Our viewers or listeners can get an understanding of what's happening in the West Bank, how bad it really is.
Well, I love the visuals. I am definitely a visual learner, so I'm looking forward to it as always, Joe. And Joe, it's interesting you mentioned Palestinian Islamic Jihad being the greatest threat. That's something we should definitely keep track of. The last issue, last week on the 4th and 5th, the Israel Defense Force launched some strikes on a couple of schools in northern Gaza. Of course, it's not as simple as that. Hamas, of course, was using the schools to shelter its fighters. Joe, is this a feature rather than a bug for Hamas? Are they looking to get the Israelis to launch attacks against infrastructure in order to help its propaganda? Give us the details on these strikes, what you know, and how does Hamas use this to further its propaganda?
Right. So it's a very good point that you brought up. I'll say this. So it's 9 months into this, there's plenty of evidence that we've seen already, that we've observed, that Hamas will use anything to shelter its fighters. All right. I mean, anything, whether it's civilian infrastructure, it could be a hospital, it could be a school, it could be a building, it could be an apartment where people are in. They don't care. They don't. Again, I said it before, the civilian population of Gaza is Hamas's greatest weapon. It's their best weapon, right? Okay. It's not the tunnels, it's not the drones, it's not the the rockets that can reach Haifa or Beersheba. It's the people. And that's what they've been doing. That's what they've been using. So now, or last week, the Israelis, they hit these schools. Actually, I think the statement said, if I'm reading the correct statement, it was an UNRWA school, of course. And
of course, right.
Yeah, of course. And so, yeah, it shows that Hamas doesn't care about the United Nations either. But nevertheless, so they hit this school that was being used as a hideout for terrorists and as an active operational infrastructure for Hamas, where this is coming from an IDF statement. They're saying that the Hamas operatives planned, directed, and carried out numerous attacks against IDF troops operating in the Gaza Strip from these schools. Okay, so, but this is what Hamas does, all right, and this is what I observed. And they did this now, and they've done this plenty of times before when civilian infrastructure was hit. Because they were operating inside of them. They come out with these statements saying a massacre, the Israeli, they'll usually use the words like the Israeli Nazis or the Nazis, something along those lines. It caused a massacre against innocent civilians, and the Israeli statements are absolutely false, that we were operating from these areas. So it's just all they come up with this propaganda, right? But it's all I want to be nice, and I'll just say it's all BS. I'll just put it like that. That's what they do. And the problem is that the IDF has published so much evidence demonstrating that the Hamas and other terrorist groups use civilian infrastructure. But those diehard people out there, the ones that you see at schools protesting, the ones that you see at schools protesting against Israel or the IDF, and those ones that you see on the streets protesting, saying that lauding the Houthis and what they're doing, it doesn't matter to them. Even if there's obvious evidence showing them that, listen, they're putting civilians in danger here on purpose. They don't care, right? Nobody. It's crazy to me, right? But yeah, the evidence is there. And Hamas, what they just do is they turn around and use it as propaganda, right? And say that the Israelis are doing all sorts of stuff when it's not true. So that's what they did here. And some people just eat it up, right? I don't have to tell you, Bill. So yeah, that's what happened here. And the Israelis hit these schools because Hamas was using them. They were operating against, they were legitimate military targets, right? So that's what happened. And unfortunately, I think at the end of the day, when all this is over, I'm hoping the Israeli military will publish more evidence, all right, of Hamas's military activities in civilian areas. There's already a lot of open source evidence demonstrating this, but I'm really interested about the UNRWA stuff because I know there's more. I'll just say that there's more stuff. It's very interesting. I imagine they'll publish it eventually, but for whatever reason they haven't now. So again, all of this stuff is not surprising at all that Hamas is doing.
Yeah, it's not. And the UNRWA stuff, this is where I think the Israelis really lose the propaganda war. I know they've made efforts to disclose the links, vehicles being used in the attack, remember people that worked for UNRWA being involved in October 7th, et cetera, et cetera. Look, UNRWA knows what Hamas has been doing all of this time. And, I'd love to see more of that exposed. And I know the Israelis make attempts, but it always just seems to fall flat. Maybe it seems like everyone knows what's happening, and no one cares. And
exactly. Yeah.
That's what's really frustrating about this. This is where the international community feeds Hamas and feeds its propaganda. It's very unfortunate. It's the Israelis, they as soon as the propaganda war, as soon as the PR war begins, they just automatically put them in the loss column. They just can't win these type of these battles because no one really wants to listen.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and that's been an issue for years. It's not new to this.
This isn't new.
No, definitely not. But it's really gotten worse this round of conflict, and we're seeing it, and especially on American streets too.
Yep, absolutely. Joe, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for the conversation. Hope you have a great week.
Absolutely. I appreciate it, Bill. You have a good day.
Thanks, everyone, for listening to today's episode of Generation Jihad. Just a reminder, you can listen to us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. Please subscribe to Generation Jihad and leave us a review, preferably a positive one, but only if we earned it. Thanks again, and we'll see you all again real soon.